Last year, the Minnesota legislature joined 6 other states in creating a task force to examine the systemic causes behind the disproportionately high rates of violence experienced by Native American women and girls. Recommendations will be due to the legislature in December 2020. Senator Patricia Torres Ray, a member of the task force, now joins me in the studio. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm happy to be here.
When I first learned about this task force, I think that I immediately drew an incorrect conclusion. I assumed that the rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women was occurring on or near tribal lands. But then I saw a statistic that 71% of Native American women live in urban areas. So is the crux of the investigation all Indigenous women and girls, no matter where they live?
Absolutely. I think that is the intent of the legislation. And you pointed out to the fact that we have really looked at this issue as a responsibility of tribal communities, understanding that not only it is their responsibility, but it is happening in tribal land. And the reality is that Native communities, Native women live in every community, in 87 counties. And we really need to look at what those jurisdictions and the responsibility of public safety or law enforcement officers are doing in each and every town in Minnesota. And it crosses borders, you know, in every state and in Canada. I mean, it goes in our entire continent. So it is incredibly important that we look at urban, suburban, and rural communities as well as tribal communities. That's the intention of the legislation.
Federal government statistics repeatedly show that American Indian women experience much higher levels of sexual violence than other U.S. women. What do you hope the task force will achieve in the end?
You know, 4 in 5 Native women have experienced some type of violence in their lives, in their lifetime. So the volume is so significant, and so there are so many aspects to the work that this task force has to do. One of the issues that we really intend to do is review existing data. Do we really have information about, you know, all of the incidents that take place, the investigations that take place? Are we collecting information? Have we done an analysis of what that means? You know, what are the underlying issues, the issues that connect to the violence that impact women? Whether we have, you know, substance abuse, domestic violence, women who live in isolation, women who have been separated from their families. There are so many factors that we need to analyze. And then we also need to look at barriers that exist. I think that's an issue that I'm very interested in doing, because we need to work on prevention, and we need to really identify what are the barriers that exist in our systems for Native women to access systems of support, the systems that exist today. Because we talk, you know, constantly about the systems that we have put in place to support women, to prevent, you know, these situations from happening. And so we need to know if they are working, if women know that they exist and they are there for them. And then finally, what are some of, you know, the gaps that exist in these systems that really do not address, you know, cultural sensitivity, access. We talk constantly about, you know, women who have children. Are we equipped really to respond to the needs of women today?
Well, let's talk about jurisdiction just for a moment, because from what I read, there's significant underreporting of the violence against Native American women. So how does jurisdiction play in? How, when it's a tribal responsibility, or where it's the sheriff, or whether it's state law enforcement, what are you looking for there?
I think this is going to be a very significant investigation. The work that we're going to do in the task force is really understanding whose responsibility is to initiate a report, and then how do we share information with tribal authorities. If it is being done, how is being conducted. I don't think we have good information about that. And you know, right now we're looking really at the incidence of violence with women, but this transcends really to child welfare. You know, how do we treat families? How do we treat women who have children? So many of the women who experience violence today experience the child welfare system and their children are being removed, how the county agencies are working with these women, is something that we have some information, but it's not exhaustive. And then we also need to look at how counties and the Department of Public Safety and law enforcement is actually conducting these investigations, and then what happened after the investigation, after the incident is being documented. You know, what are the services that exist and who's providing these services? I think that we don't have good information, and that's why one of the most important steps that the task force needs to take is to really dive into what does the infrastructure look like today? How are we partnering right now with our tribal systems? If we are partnering at all, what counties take this more seriously, what law enforcement officers, jurisdictions take this more seriously than others, and we need to build some consistency in the work that we do, and then later on figure out where are the gaps that exist that we need to correct. So right now, I think this is one aspect that we really want to dive into first.
There is an underlying issue of trauma, as you're pointing out. The journal Cultural Diversity and Ethnic Minority Psychology points out that Native American and Alaskan Native women populations, not just women, experience higher rates of alcohol abuse, mental illness, and other traumas. In what ways do you think these experiences play into more victimization of women and girls?
I think it's very significant. My background is child welfare, and I dealt with this system of child protection for 16 years before I became a senator. And the overwhelming majority of cases where we have child protection investigations involved chemical dependency. And I feel that the system has understood this and have acknowledged the fact that we have some significant issues we need to address in terms of historic trauma and use of chemical dependency. But we have really not built a system that is adequate in terms of resources and also that is culturally responsive. And so we have a long way to go. And to me personally, this is one area in which I really, really want to put emphasis in terms of time and resources. Because we could have a very good system of reporting and documenting and making sure that our system counts these incidents. But if we are not equipped to respond to these incidents and to underline, to look at how do we do prevention, how do we provide services to the families and to the women, then I don't think that we have done what is necessary. So to me, this is really the most important issue that we need to do. We need to respond to the critical needs that women we know have today, because we have documented some of these very significant problems, but yet we're not investing enough in dealing with some of these very historic traumas that have affected families and women for generations.
I will look forward to reading those recommendations as they come out towards the end of next year. Senator Torres Ray, thank you so much.
Thank you.